Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi. Thank you so much for joining us in another live stream with me here, as always, our very special guest and brother in the Lord, David Wood. David, thank you so much for making time for us. I know you're busy, and I always appreciate any time you can give to us, brother. So thank you for doing so.
Good to be here.
And I want to thank you, brother. And I want to thank everyone, of course, for those who are waiting for us. We apologize. Yesterday, I know Sam was going to be with me, but believe it or not, folks, it was definitely one of those spiritual attacks. The internet decided not to work, and usually it's an easy fix, but it wasn't working at all. So me and Sam will come back again in a few days to continue Christology, and then we'll move on to another series. This week, by the way, folks, I will have Jay Dyer on Friday, so I just want you to be aware of this. I'm going to have Matt Slick on Saturday, and I'm going to have a special guest, a former Muslim, a female, who will be sharing her testimony on Sunday. So we'll be announcing all of that for you. Today's topic, as we announced, has to do with this claim that the Quran has been perfectly preserved. And if any of you, our viewers, have been following along recent developments in terms of what someone like Dr. Yasser Qadhi have said about holes in the narrative concerning the early transmission of the Quran, or what Shabir Ali has been doing about that, and what Jay Smith has been talking about, and what even David Wood has been sharing with you in the last at least 2 weeks concerning this concept of preservation, you know that there has been problems, huge problems, that our Muslim friends are now facing the music and realizing that it's not as easy as saying things like, you've been refuted. It doesn't work that way anymore. With that in mind, David, why don't you just share with us the most recent development from your side as an apologist, as someone who's been involved with Muslims for many, many years, maybe over a decade now, if not even more. What was the picture like when you started it, and where we at today? I mean, I know some of these answers, but I just wanted your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, so I'd had discussions with some Muslims back in the 90s, but when I really started getting into dealing with the topic of Islam and Muhammad and Muslim objections to Christianity and so on was 2001. So that's when I met Nabil, and that's when I actually, started, paying more attention to the Muslim sources and so on. And back then it was, we still hear it. We still hear it all the time. But the claim from Muslim apologists across the board was that there's only been one Quran ever. It's been perfectly preserved right down to the letter. You will not find any difference anywhere in any Quran manuscript in the world, because it's just a miracle. Every time someone sits down to write out a copy of the Quran, Allah miraculously protects that person from making an error. And I had Muslims who would say, because I would ask, I would say, okay, what if a person sits down right now and tries to write out the Quran and tries to insert something in there? They said you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. Allah would stop you and make you write the correct thing. They believe it was an actual ongoing 14th century miracle. And there are a couple different routes you can go from there. You can you can look at different manuscripts. You can look at the Muslim sources. There are all kinds of things you can do to know whether that is true or not. But just by going through the Muslim sources, I kept seeing stories in the hadiths and elsewhere that talk about changes to the Quran. So Sahih Muslim, Abu Musa talks about 2 entire chapters of the Quran being lost. And he said, because Muslims hardened their hearts, meaning gosh, we don't feel like reciting this again. So they hardened their hearts and these things were lost. We have hundreds of verses coming up just from Surah 33 alone. We have Ubay ibn Ka'b and Ibn Masud not even agreeing on the same chapters that we have in the Quran today. And so there were all these differences that you can read about in the Muslim sources. And, even going down to Aisha in Sunan ibn Majah, 1944, saying that verses were eaten by a sheep when they were preparing Muhammad's body after he died, and verses were eaten by a sheep. And so you look at those kinds of things and you say, there's no way this book has been perfectly preserved. What in the world are you talking about? And so that's kind of the situation I knew back then. And fortunately now it's a much better situation, because now you have people like Dan Brubaker going through the manuscripts, putting manuscripts on the screen, showing how they contain corrections, showing that they contain differences from today's Quran. And really the main awesome development that recently happened accidentally came from Muslims, of course. So anyone who's been following this knows what happened. Muhammad Hijab has been confronted over and over again by people who are pointing out differences. And you can look at the videos that were put out by Muslims in recent years, and the videos are claiming that it's all just, yeah, okay, if there are some differences, it's just because differences in accent, people in different areas. And I had Muslims explain this to me, and they said, it's just like someone speaks English, but with an Irish accent. That's all these differences are. And so Muhammad Hijab believed this nonsense that he was told, that, this all just comes down to differences in accent and things like that. And so, but he couldn't answer the claims of people like, Hatun Tash and Jay Smith, who are putting manuscripts in front of Muslims, who are putting actual modern Qurans in front of Muslims and pointing out the differences. Look at all these differences. These are not simply differences of accent. And so he finally got Sheikh Yasser Qadhi on his program and asked Sheikh Yasser Qadhi, and Muhammad Hijab clearly thought that Yasser Qadhi was just going to end all of these attacks against the Quran. And instead, he just exposed them. He exposed them to an entire generation of Muslims. He admitted that, the arguments that Muslims use to console themselves about all the differences in the Quran by explaining them in terms of kirat and ahruf and so on. He says, once you get to the scholarly level, and they're willing to cross that, these Western scholars, these Western academics who don't have the red line that we Muslims have, he said, they point out that your answer doesn't actually work. And Yasser Qadhi even said, and they're right. They're right because they're quoting your sources. So there's actually a much bigger picture here, I think, in what Yasser Qadhi is saying. Yasser Qadhi is saying, he says, at the beginning stages of knowledge, and most Muslims haven't even reached that beginning stage, because most Muslims believe perfect preservation right down to the letter. They don't know about kirat and ahruf. They've never heard of this stuff. But at the beginning of knowledge, once you start learning about this stuff, he says, your response is, what is this? What is all this stuff? What is this? This is confusing. He says, then if you go deeper, if you look further, you start believing whatever your leaders, your teachers, your scholars say. And he says, you just regurgitate this. So this would be something like, oh, yes, there are different ahruf, but this is just different dialects. There's no problem, because there were different Arabic dialects. And so Muhammad revealed it in different ways to make it easier on the people who spoke different dialects. So Yasser Qadhi says, basically, you learn to just repeat that. That's what you're told, and that's what you repeat. And he says, then you get to a deeper level where you're actually encountering people who might disagree with you. And you realize that, as he puts it, there are holes in the narrative, meaning it just doesn't fit. And so he acknowledged this while trying the entire time to avoid the topic, saying we should not be having this discussion in front of regular Muslims. We should not. You should not discuss this. You should just mindlessly accept what we tell you, even though he's admitting that what they're telling you can't stand up to scrutiny. And so he's saying that, and it was just hilarious, because Hijab just kept pushing him and pushing him and pushing him. And Hijab is one of the Muslims who's been saying for years that, no, the Quran is so clear that even if you just started with a blank Quran, you could write exactly what came from Muhammad. And so once Sheikh Yasser Qadhi had just unleashed this epic admission about the Quran, that there are holes in the narrative, that the Muslim responses can't stand up to scrutiny, once that there's total confusion among Muslim scholars about the relationship between these kirat and ahruf, and why Uthman, had to burn all these Qurans. After admitting all of this, our good friend and hero now, Muhammad Hijab, pushed him anyway, despite Yasser Qadhi saying over and over and over again, like a beating drum, I do not want to have this discussion because it's going to ruin people's faith in the Quran. Hijab pushed him on it anyway, and hit him with, well, yeah, but if I gave you a blank mushaf, then obviously you could write what goes in the Quran. Yasser, it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy answer.
Right.
And so, and Hijab even said, I feel like it should be an easy answer. And he's right. If there were this perfectly preserved Quran and down to the letter and so on, obviously, I could give you a blank Quran. You just copy any manuscript of the Quran. It's going to be exactly the same. And it just didn't. So he's admitting that is a myth. It's a total myth. And Hijab clearly was shocked and they tried to undo the damage. Hijab then deleted that portion of the footage. Yasser Qadi didn't want to cover it up, so he still has the full video on his channel, but he stopped the comments. So he blocked comments on his video because Muslims were saying, I'm losing faith now. I'm losing faith in Islam, and I'm going to have to stand before Allah and point my finger at you, and you're the one who destroyed my faith. So this has been massive embarrassment from Muslims. But notice, this is all because they lied. This is completely on them. If they'd been honest about the evidence, if they'd been saying for 14 centuries, Allah gave a bunch of revelations through Muhammad, and we didn't always do a good job of preserving those revelations, but we got the basic gist of Islam, and what we have is still reliable. We lost some things along the way because we hardened our hearts, and that's why we realized we need to write these things down. And so we've tried to preserve it. Hasn't been a perfect process, but nothing involving human beings is going to be a perfect process. And so, yeah, we have the Quran today, and it's pretty good copy of what was revealed to Muhammad. If they'd said that, what would they have to worry about now? Why would they have to worry about manuscripts right now? If they'd just been honest with the evidence, they wouldn't have to be worrying. Instead, they lied, and they lied some more. And now Muslims whose confidence in Islam has been based on the supposed perfect preservation of the Quran is being shaken, and Muslim scholars are forced to try and preserve their confidence in the perfect preservation of the Quran while admitting now that there are all these differences, because you can't deny them. You can't deny them. They're right in front of your face. Again, Dan Brubaker's putting pictures up on the screen. Look at all of these differences. He made one video where I think he showed 11 or 12 Quran variants on one page of one manuscript.
Page alone. Exactly.
Yeah. And what are Muslims saying? Muslims, oh, you've been refuted. It's so sad and pathetic. But anyway, the point is, we are actually living in an awesome time. This is one of the most epic times in the history of apologetics dealing with Islam. It's Muslim scholars and apologists spent decades giving Muslims false confidence in their religion based upon lies, believing that no one's actually ever going to expose these lies. And suddenly we get to right now where we're exposing the lies, and the leaders and apologists are scrambling to try to preserve the lie. But in order to preserve the lie, they have to lie more. And so we're just waiting for this light switch moment from the Muslim community, when the community as a whole suddenly realizes, wait a minute. The reason we're scrambling to answer all of these objections and all of these proofs that the Quran hasn't been perfectly preserved, the reason we're in this position is because our leaders are liars. Our apologists are liars. Our scholars have been lying to us. Well, if they've been lying to us about the Quran, I mean, of all things that you want to lie to us about, you lie to us about the Quran? If they've been lying to us about the Quran, maybe they've been lying to us about Muhammad. Maybe they've been lying about God. Maybe they've been lying about theology. Maybe they've been lying about all this stuff. We cannot trust these people anymore. We need to investigate this for ourselves. And as soon as the Muslim community gets to that point, you are going to see a mass exodus from Islam, because they don't have any actual evidence. That's why they have to resort to lies. And since they resort to lies, well, those lies are now being exposed. And man, it is, gosh, it would be sad to watch if it weren't so diabolical.
Absolutely, David. And I like what you're saying also. I mean, for instance, the hadith about Abu Musa that you mentioned, some of the Muslims will jump into that. Like, for instance, recently, Shabir Ali, about maybe a couple of days ago, he issued one of his own new videos on Let the Quran Speak. And he was saying about hadiths like this, not specifically Abu Musa, any hadith that will talk about, oh, we used to have this surah and its length used to be equal to this chapter or whatever. And his claim was, well, because it was abrogated. Now, the hadith about that Abu Musa mentioned, by the way, did he even mention once it was abrogated? Not once, David. So why
Yep.
can't they get away with kind of this kind of stuff? I mean, I just, it baffles me in a world that we're living in times as this, where people have access to technology, internet, they can research things on their own. These so-called imams, clerks, scholars still can get away with that kind of claim. Why?
Yeah.
Why do you think is that?
And notice in that hadith, if anyone wants to look it up, it's Sahih Muslim 2286. But he warns the professional Quran reciters of Basra. He says, don't harden your hearts as we hardened our hearts and forgot 2 chapters of the Quran. If it's abrogated, then it's supposed to be from Allah. Why is he warning people? It's not because you hardened your heart. It's because, I mean, the best you could say is that Allah hardened your hearts through some miraculous intervention to make you forget these chapters that are in his eternal Quran, but which he doesn't want you to recite anymore. But then why is he warning these other Muslims? I mean, if the only time you forget parts of the Quran is when Allah wants something taken out, why is he warning these other guys? If they forget something from the Quran, then it's from Allah. So why is he warning them? He's saying, guys, don't be like us. What do you mean? You guys forgot parts of the Quran because Allah wanted you to? Why would you be warning other people not to do that? Why would you say it's because of the hardness of your hearts when it's from Allah making you do this? So there's that problem. There's the additional problem that this doesn't fit the standard concept of abrogation. The standard concept of abrogation is that Allah abrogates commands because, what's best for a community could conceivably change from time to time. When Muhammad is outnumbered and outgunned in Mecca, well, it's in the best interest of the Muslim community not to fight back. So they're told not to fight back. Well, guess what? In later situations, it's in the best interest of the community to fight back and to conquer. So the revelations change. So, commands get abrogated, but there's no way the entire, 2 entire chapters of the Quran were all commands. In fact, in the example that we have, he says, Abu Musa said that he remembers a verse from this chapter, which is over 100 verses long. He remembers that it contains this verse about the sons of Adam, and if they had 2 valleys full of riches, they would want a 3rd valley. So that's a lesson about human greed. It's never enough. If you can sit here right now and say, man, I wish I was a millionaire. And as soon as you're a millionaire, well, I wish I was a billionaire. And if you're a billionaire, well, I want to be a trillionaire. So that's not, here's a command for you. So why is this is part of Allah's eternal Quran. So it's part of Allah's eternal speech. And it's a lesson about being greedy. Why would that be abrogated? Why would that, oh no, I can't have them believe this statement, which teaches them a lesson from my eternal speech? Why is it part of Allah's eternal speech if he has to give it to us for a couple of years and then snatch it back by hardening people's hearts? And they think that that they did something wrong and they have to warn other people not to fall for the same thing. So that's another point. And the third point I would make is, notice using the methods that Muslims use, you could say any book's been perfectly preserved. You could pick any book in all of history, the Iliad, the Odyssey, whatever you want. Plato's Republic, you could pick any book in all of history and say that book has been perfectly preserved right down to the letter. And you say, what? I'm looking at different manuscripts and oops, this manuscript left that out. Oh, that's because it was abrogated. Well, this one has a different wording of this passage. Oh, that's because it was revealed in multiple different ways. And some preserve this and some preserve that, and they complement one another. So try and figure out the differences in these different versions, and that's going to give you a deeper understanding. Anything, you could take any book in history, look at all the differences, and explain them using the same way that Muslims use to explain all the differences in their books. And so it's just absolutely amazing. What they're really telling us is, you look at a book that's been changed and corrupted. Look at all the features of a book that's been changed and corrupted. What are the features of that book? Well, sometimes things come up missing. Sometimes things are added. Sometimes you have differences, different wording of the same text, and so on in different manuscripts. That's what you say according to your definition of corruption. That's what you find, and then you find that the Quran has all of those features. The history of the Quran has all the features of a book that's been changed and corrupted, according to the Muslim definition of what a changed and corrupted book is. And so basically what they're telling us is the Quran has all of the observable features of a book that's been changed and corrupted. We take our definition of a book that's been changed and corrupted. The Quran meets that definition perfectly, and yet it's been perfectly preserved anyway because God wanted it Allah wanted it to have all the features of a book that's been changed and corrupted, but since he wanted it, it's somehow been perfectly preserved right down to the letter. And this is, you just look at this and you go, this is absolute nonsense. I mean, it's delusional. It's borderline insane to say, here's a book, it has all the features of a corrupt book, but perfect preservation right down to the letter, in spite of the fact that none of this fits, doesn't work. If I didn't know anything about Islam, if the only thing I knew about Islam was that it compels people to be completely delusional about the book, that would be enough for me to say, I don't want this religion, man. I don't want this religion if it forces you to think like this.
Correct. And, you mentioned earlier, like some of Muslims' explanations, like, oh, these are just like you speak in Texan, and now all of a sudden you go to England or you go to other place and somehow you pronounce it differently. So I'm sharing just kind of like at least simple analyses between differences that you can find in Warsh, which is one of the readings found, at least one of the Qira'at in North Africa, and Hafs, which is the most common one these days, especially 1924 Cairo edition. I just want people to see for themselves the type of differences that David is referring to, that our Muslim friends try to downplay. So let's look at this. For instance, in chapter 1 of the Quran, verse 4, describes Allah one time as king, one time as an owner. Malik as an owner, Malik as king. Even if you're not an Arab speaking person, you can tell there is a difference in how it's being pronounced. Now look at the meaning. Is an owner like a king? Of course not. By the way, there's a third reading that Ijaz Ahmed didn't believe that it does exist when I mentioned it to him. And that's Malaka, meaning he was given position. What are we talking about? The day of judgment. Look at the next one. For instance, chapter 3, verse 49 and chapter 5, verse 110. Describing something either as flying or as a bird. Well, anything can be flying if you throw something, or maybe something different than a bird flew in the air, versus an actual bird. The idea that in chapter 4, verse 5, item number 3 here, one means of supporting something. The other one, you're talking about valuable things. You're talking about valuable material and things like that. I mean, you can see the major differences between these readings, and you cannot say that it's one and the same. It changes the context, the meaning of the verse, and sometimes even the tense itself of the verb changes. Sometimes it's an imperative like qul, qul, say, and sometimes it is in the past tense, qala, he said. It doesn't mean the same, David, right? I mean, we're talking about God, who supposedly his word is eternal. This Quran supposedly is preserved in the preserved tablets in heaven for all of eternity. So which one of these readings was there?
Yeah, and there are additional problems with how you got all of these variants, and you have these kinds of variants even among Qurans today, right? Because the story is that it's revealed in these 7 ahruf, and Muslims don't even know what these ahruf are, and the standard definition that they give doesn't fit the evidence. We should probably talk about that a little more here in a minute. But supposedly Uthman standardizes the Quran. He gets rid of all these things, puts everything in the Quraysh dialect, and then somehow you end up with all these differences over again. And what's funny is you can look at the words and you can look at how similar they are, even though some little mark, some little letter difference or some little marks makes a huge difference in meaning. You can see how a scribe would have come up with these different words or made this mistake, especially if originally you don't have the dots and you don't have the vowels and so on. So you can understand how people would make these mistakes. And yet our Muslim friends want to say, nope, these were all revealed. It was revealed in all of these different ways. And somehow, even after Uthman standardizes some of them, even after Uthman standardizes the Quran, you still get all of these differences. And it's still perfect preservation right down to the letter, because all of these differences come from Allah. And it's just, the question is, one, how could a Muslim possibly prove perfect preservation to someone who didn't already believe it? They would have to say, look at all our manuscripts. They contain tons of differences. And our hadith collections and so on, they're filled with claims about chapters coming up missing, large passages coming up missing, verses being eaten by his sheep. They're filled with that kind of stuff. And nevertheless, that's our evidence for the perfect preservation. You say, what are you talking about? Are you insane? So that's one thing. The other thing is, given their methodology, they've made their position basically completely unfalsifiable. That's where you make a claim and you won't allow any evidence, that no evidence can possibly stand against it, right? If anytime something comes up missing, you're just going to say, well, it's it's abrogation. Or anytime something is added that wasn't there earlier, you say, oh, the earlier person, he made a mistake. And anytime you have a difference, you say, oh, that's because it was revealed in all these different ways. Again, you're just saying, hey, the Quran has all the characteristics of a book that's been corrupted. Nevertheless, this is our evidence that it's been perfectly preserved right down to the letter. And you say, what is this? Again, what is this religion? Why does it do this to people? Can't be the truth, right? A true religion would not do this to people, would not cause people to just revel in lies and to love being lied to.
Absolutely, David. And you know what baffles me also is how the scholars these days, like for instance, I shared with you recently a link to Shabir Ali. I'm not so sure really if your time permitted you to at least listen to what he says about, for instance, the hadith that the goat ate one of those manuscripts, and he was laughing. Actually, he says, "Oh, it's almost like you claim that the dog ate your homework." These are just weak traditions. We don't believe in them anymore. I mean, I'm like, since when these traditions all of a sudden now are discounted, not accepted? And it's really, a standard operating procedure when it comes to the history of Islam, right? I mean, whenever you push them in the corner, somehow they come back now with a new way to try to explain it.
Yeah, and it's and really and this is a difference between. This needs to be pointed out very seriously to Muslims, that it's common now, even though you can look in Sunan Ibn Majah, you can look up the grade of that hadith. It's classified as good. So if you want to just throw this stuff out, which is what you have to do, you have to throw all of these sources out. And what Muslims will do is they'll look well, we don't know a lot about this guy in this narration, so we have to throw this out. Whereas that's because they rely on one of the silliest methods anyone has ever come up with for doing history, this method of isnad criticism and so on. Whereas from a non-Muslim perspective, from the perspective of that's common to historians, if you're saying that this is fabricated, this is made up, the first question would be, why are Muslims making up all these stories about chapters coming up missing, passages coming up missing, verses being lost in battle, verses being eaten by a sheep? If you do not believe these, why are Muslims fabricating and inventing lies about the corruption of the book that they know has been perfectly preserved? And two, how do these end up in Islam's most trusted sources? How do you end up with these? And you can't think of any good reason. I mean, you can't think of a good reason for Muslims to sit around there like, wow, you know what? We've got all of these perfectly preserved copies of the Quran, no difference anywhere. You know what we need? We need to invent a bunch of lies about changes in the Quran. This is the principle of embarrassment, right? The only reason for Muslims to include these stories is that, like it or not, these things happened. And it's embarrassing. And the only reason for them to include these stories was because, like it or not, they knew it was true and they didn't want to lie about it. And so you should be looking at these guys and say, hey, you guys who admitted that the Quran has been changed and altered and that chapters came up missing, we can respect you for your honesty. Whereas if Muslims are fabricating and inventing stories about changes in the Quran, then I'm sorry, I can't trust you on anything. Obviously, if you'll invent embarrassing things and lie about your book to insult your own book, I obviously can't believe you when you're praising your prophet or saying good stories about him, because if you'll lie about things that hurt you, you'll obviously lie about things that will help you. So my bottom line would be, if you want to throw out these sources about the corruption of the Quran, then great. Don't tell me anything about your prophet. We have to be complete skeptics now about your prophet. We have to conclude that the early generations of Muslims were the biggest bunch of liars the world has ever seen. We can't trust anything they say, and therefore don't tell us about your book at all. How do you know about how the Quran was put together? How do you know anything from the same sources that say it was changed over and over and over again? But you're telling us we can't trust those. Well, if we can't trust those, then great. We don't know where your book came from. So
that's right, David. And we're living this right now. We're living an example of how it's done. Look what happened when pushback came against Yasser Qadi and Muhammad Hijab. What did Muhammad Hijab do? Cut a portion of that
Cut it
video
off.
to make it as if it never happened. What did Yasser Qadi do? Blocked you from making comments anymore. Like he doesn't want to hear it from you anymore. And on top of this, like I was watching Dr. Brubaker's video today, and one of the comments was, "Oh, Brubaker, you've been refuted." And Dr. Brubaker's was classic in his response, like, "What's there to refute? I'm just showing images." So what is it that you're refuting when someone is sharing their research with you? And they claim that he's attacking Islam. Where is Dr. Brubaker attacking Islam? He's just talking about findings as a researcher, as a scholar. How is that attacking anything, basically?
Yeah, and really, this problem, that what Yasser Qadi put his finger on is, I would say, the core problem of Islamic apologetics and everything else, right? When he pointed out that when you start looking, when you start investigating, you're like, what is this? Oh my goodness, what is all this talk about ahruf and kirat? This doesn't make any sense. I've been told one Quran, perfectly preserved, no differences. And then I hear there are all these differences. And then the next level is you just learn to mindlessly repeat what your leaders and your apologists say. But then if you dig a little deeper, you find out that what they say cannot stand up to scrutiny. So what you're finding, what your average Muslim is doing right now is they're kind of at that second stage of apologetics. They're learning, there are all these differences in the Quran, and in the Muslim sources, there are chapters that came up missing and passages that came up missing and verses eaten by a sheep. And so now they're getting into that second stage where, Shabir Ali said this, another Muslim said this, this Muslim answered this. And they're just mindlessly accepting it without bothering to think seriously and critically. Does this really, really answer the problem? And it doesn't. And so what we're trying to do is keep pushing the issue until they get into that third stage where they realize what Shabir's defense of the perfect preservation of the Quran, the defense of all these other Muslims, this is all nonsense. They are not answering these questions. They are not explaining why the Quran has all the features of a book that's been changed and corrupted, and yet they're still saying perfectly preserved. Doesn't make any sense.
That's right, David. And, I loved what, I feel bad really for Yasser Qadi, because I can understand why he is concerned. I mean, the guy is concerned. I mean, it's a matter of safety now. I mean, we're not talking just an academic opinion that everybody else is against you. No. He knows his life now is on the line, and his livelihood probably as well. All that to say is that, when Muslims try to change basically the interpretation, what is so interesting to me is that what Shabir Ali says, or what Yasser Qadi, or what Adnan Rashid, or any of these so-called Islamic scholars say, I assure you, David, as an Arab from Saudi, from the Middle East, if they were to go there and say exactly the same thing they're saying here in English, you'll see the real reaction that they are going to get. Because it's easy for them to say these things here in the West, but let's say, what would the opinion be of people in the East, the Arab scholars, the clerks, the Islamic teachers, the Quranic, memorizers? Are they going to agree with these new interpretations of why the Quran now, well, it was eclectic, the collection, as one of them says. You have people reading things from the Prophet, memorizing it, and then Uthman decided what is the best way to put it together and how to put it together.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this before, but after that interview between Yasser Qadi and Muhammad Hijab, we would have been happy to defend Yasser Qadi and say, guys,
absolutely,
we respect this man for finally, because you Muslims who are watching, I'm going to tell you, when we've gone through your sources and we see what your sources say about the history of your text, and when people like Dan Brubaker are putting pictures of manuscripts up on the screen, pointing to all of the differences, explaining all of the differences, and one of your apologists comes along and says, perfect preservation right down to the letter. I have tons of Muslim apologetics books proclaiming this as a miracle. It's a miracle that there is not one difference in any manuscript anywhere. We've got Sheikh Yasser Qadi saying this, right? We have him on video from a few years ago saying that since the time of Uthman, there is not one difference anywhere in any Quran manuscript. It's completely, totally false. So when we hear your scholars and apologists saying perfect preservation right down to the letter, we look at this and we say, these guys are liars. We cannot trust a word these people are saying. These are complete liars. They know that that is false. They know it. When your average Muslim on the street tells me the Quran has been perfectly preserved, I don't think he's lying to me. I know he heard that from other people that he trusts. And so he thinks he's telling me the truth. When one of your scholars tells me the Quran has been perfectly preserved, he knows what the sources say. He knows there are differences in the manuscripts. And so I know he is lying deliberately in order to deceive people. So when one of your scholars comes along and acknowledges, yep, this is a difficult situation. Yeah, it's not as easy as we like to tell people. Yeah, I don't even want to talk about this in front of people because it's just going to hurt people's faith. I look at that and say, wow, I can actually listen to what this guy's saying because he's acknowledging the truth. So you think it's oh, he's going to destroy our religion. That's a person we could listen to. So when Yasser Qadhi was saying those things, that's someone we would look at and we would say, guys, we have respect for this person. If this person wants to explain Islam to us, we will listen. The rest of you scholars who are still saying perfect preservation right down to the letter, I don't want to hear a word out of your mouth because I don't trust the word you're saying because you're freaking liars. You are absolute liars. Shut up, you're liars. I don't want to hear it from you. But if a person is acknowledging the truth and he's acknowledging reality, then I'm happy to listen. So that's what Yasser Qadhi came out. But then instead of standing his ground, then he went into attack mode and started attacking everyone who was pointing out what he said. And so he sort of lost that. And now basically everyone's going after him. We're not going to stop. He's given us a gold mine. In that one interview, he's given us a gold mine, especially now that he caused people to go back through his earlier talks and presentations and lectures and to point out all the hypocrisy. He'll tell one audience, if it's complete beginners, he'll tell them perfect preservation right down to the letter. If he's talking to another audience who actually is at a higher level and they actually are aware of differences in the Quran, he starts saying, yes, there are different versions of the Quran in different parts of the world, but that's because, and then he'll go through his explanation. So his message changes based on the audience. And this is really the clash that happened. It's that sometimes he's talking to scholarly audiences. Sometimes he's talking to the popular level. When he was on Muhammad Hijab's live stream, Yasser Qadhi understood, wait a minute, there could be scholarly people watching this. And if I tell them perfect preservation, they're going to know I'm lying. But if I acknowledge the truth in front of the regular Muslims who think perfect preservation, then I will have shaken their faith. And you don't want to be the guy who causes millions of Muslims to start doubting Islam. You don't want to be that guy. And so his best response, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to say a word about this. And so, but all he did was really show Muslims, guys, there's more to this story. There's holes in the narrative. And you guys at some point just have to stop mindlessly believing these guys, right? I mean, think about it. The same Muslims who are now telling Muslims, oh, the reason we have all of these differences is because of, the different qira'at, and it was revealed in different ways. And the reason we have these differences in the manuscripts is because of this. And the reason these chapters came up missing was because of that. And the reason these verses are gone is because of this. Wait a minute. These are the same guys who 2 years ago told you perfect preservation right down to the letter, not one difference anywhere in the entire history of the Quran. Those are the same guys. Why would you listen? Why would you listen to what they're saying to you now when you already caught them lying? Their lies have been exposed. Why do you then believe their defense of it, right? And what's going to happen? Now they're saying, oh, this has changed because of abrogation. Oh, this has changed because of qira'at. Guys, we're just getting started here. We're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep pushing. We're going to expose all of this nonsense. And what's going to happen? 2 years from now, they're going to give you a completely different defense, a completely different explanation. And then you're going to be regurgitating their explanation. The question is, how many times do these guys have to lie to you blatantly, indisputably lie in an effort to keep you deceived and ignorant? How many times do they have to do that before you'll finally realize, I just can't trust these guys anymore? It seems there's no limit. They can lie to you 1,000 times and you'll just keep believing them. And what is this? What is this religion, man, that does this to people?
Absolutely, David. I mean, it's imagine, David, like let's say me, you, Sam, Christian Prince, we said something 5 years ago, and then we come back again and we contradict what we said 5 years ago. Do you think the Muslims going to leave us alone?
No.
Do you think they're going to just cut us some slack? They're going to attack anything and everything. But somehow now, all of a sudden, one of their own, who, by the way, everything he says was spot on. He wasn't even saying anything that is unknown. We were excited because he finally, one from the community itself, began to say the things that we've been saying for years.
Yeah,
So,
it's just interesting because, you know, on the one hand, you want to say people's positions can change over years, right? You could go back to something I said 10 years ago and my position might have changed. And you say, look, this is different from what David said 10 years ago. Point is, what these guys were saying 5-10 years ago, they knew that was a lie. If you were an educated Muslim and you went to school, especially if you went to a place like Yale for your studies, you knew there are differences, massive differences, tens of thousands of differences in the manuscripts of the Quran. So if you were telling people perfect preservation right down to the letter, not one difference anywhere since the time of Uthman, you knew you were lying. And so this isn't simply, I've changed my perspective over the past 5 or 10 years. That's completely acceptable. This is, okay, you were lying 10 years ago. You were lying 5 years ago. Now you're acknowledging that there are differences, which confirms that you were lying 5 years ago and 10 years ago. Why should we believe what you're saying now? The only way I would trust someone like this again is if he just came out and said, guys, I was lying 10 years ago. I gave in to pressure. I understood this. And I thought it was more important to preserve the faith of Muslims than to give them the truth. And I repent of that. And I'm changing my path. And I'm only going to speak the truth from now on. That I might listen to you then. But right now, my goodness, what a disaster.
And not only that, I mean, I can always come back, David, and say, folks, I've been exposed to a lot of new research and I'm starting to see evidence that there are some holes in the standard. I mean, any way you can say it, at least, and that's what he did. He pointed out to scholarly work that is definitely catching up, according to his word, catching up with the reality of that tradition. Now, I want to tell our moderators, please pay attention to any questions, meaningful questions. And if you don't mind, just putting them for me so we can see if we can answer any of them. David's time is very tight. He has another live stream to need to prepare for. So he has another probably 10 to 15 minutes max. I don't want to delay him. So if we have any questions, please put them here. By the way, Nada, I did see a question. You're saying it's for David. And David, the question was, how do you know the different Qurans? Which I'm not so surely what is that question. I mean, there is so many ways you know different Qurans. This is different qira'at, you know. Are we talking about differences within these qira'at? So would you like to take a shot at something like this?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, basically, I mean, I think the most straightforward understanding of that would be like what Hatun Tash is doing, where I think she's up to like 37 different Arabic versions of the Quran, meaning that as you go to different parts of the world and you look at the Quran that they use in that local area, you can go to the market and buy a copy of the Quran, and then you open it up and you put it side by side with the 1924 Cairo edition, and you find all of these differences in the manuscript. And the apostate prophet had an awesome live stream where he had an interview with someone who studies this, and they just talked about the differences, went through the differences between the Hafs and the Warsh. And no, these are not differences in dialect. These are different Arabic texts with different meanings. And so you need something better than dialects. And so anyway, when we're talking about different Qurans, when we're talking about different Qurans, we can mean a couple of different things. One of the most common things we'd mean today is exactly what people like Sheikh Yasser Qadi are admitting now, and exactly what Shabir Ali is admitting. Shabir Ali now is saying, yes, you can go to different places of the world and find different Qurans that have some differences, but they don't affect any core Islamic doctrine. So he's acknowledging that there are different versions of the Quran, but he's pointing out that nothing that would undermine Islamic faith or change any core doctrine. So that's one thing we could mean. Another thing we could mean is that, Abdullah ibn Masud didn't believe that 3 chapters of the Quran are supposed to be in there. Ubay ibn Ka'b had all of the 114 chapters Muslims have today, but he had an additional 2 chapters. Or if you wanted to say, if you wanted to talk about the original Quran revealed to Muhammad, that would have even more, right? Because it would have those 2 chapters that were lost. It would have the hundreds of verses that came up missing from Surah 33. It would contain the verses that were eaten by a sheep. It would contain all of these verses and all of these additional chapters. And so the Quran, if Muslims had accurately preserved the Quran as it was revealed to Muhammad, that would be a very different Quran version than what you have today. So you can mean all kinds of things. The point is, there are now, and there have always been, a lot of different versions of the Quran. And yet Muslim leaders and scholars keep saying one Quran, perfectly preserved, no differences anywhere. It's a total lie.
Now it's kind of ironic, isn't it? Because I can say we have one Bible, whether ESV, King James, NIV, whatever, it is still the same Bible. Why? Because the translation is based on the original. Now, even with that, Muslims laugh at us and they think like we have different versions of the Bible. But somehow, what they have is uniquely different. That's what's so amazing. By the way, I have a question. We're going to run it by you, but I just wanted to mention to you, David, that a friend of ours by the name Islam Critique says his faith was destroyed by Yasser Qadi in terms of the perfect preservation of the Quran. So we're going to need to pray for Islam Critique.
Yeah.
So we have Izhar Achoa. I'm going to put his question here. He says, how can you tell which is Hafs and which is Warsh? Now, I'm going to answer and you take a shot at it. If you're having an Arabic copy of the Quran, usually it will tell you an introduction. This was based on which reading. And these days you can even go and Google online and you'll see for yourself sometimes even the differences between the two. But go ahead, David, if you want to answer this as well.
Yeah, you would look for a copy of the Warsh, right? You could buy a copy, right? Hatun has
you can do that.
Yeah, you can buy them. So yeah, you would just check beforehand. And it would be easier depending on which area you're in, right? So if you want one, again, I think Hatun has 37 different Arabic versions of the Quran. These are not 37 translations. These are 37 different Arabic versions of the Quran that are used in different parts of the world. But if you want one of those, then you'd go to that area. You'd go to the area where that version of the Quran is used and get a copy or try to order one. If you're not in that area, you could always order one from there.
That's right. And Hatun will be with me, by the way, Thursday, Lord willing, and we'll ask her this question as well. But all that to say is that these days, it's so easy to get your hand on any of these copies. In fact, there is websites that can even sell you these different, basically, qira'at according to this reader and transmitter or this reader and that transmitter. So this is how you would to know these kind of differences. And like I said, there are websites that even list the differences for you and how to pronounce certain things. So it is so easy these days. It's hard really to claim that you don't know or you didn't know about anything. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions for us here. So let me scroll down. Anything else, David, you want to talk about by way of the things you're working towards, maybe in the area of the Quran and Quranic manuscripts and qira'at in particular?
Yeah, because this issue of ahruf and kirat is something that I never studied. And I didn't study it because back when Nabil and I were starting off and we were debating and so on, he studied it before I was going to study it. And he started pointing out, he said, they have no idea what these ahruf are. We always hear dialects. And he goes, you look at the positions of Muslim scholars, they have all these, they don't know what it is. And everyone's position gets attacked by everyone else. And none of it actually fits the evidence. And he's going, they have no clue what they're talking about. So I was like, at that point, I was like, well, I'm not going to study this if you guys can't even figure out what you mean. So when the issue of perfect preservation came up, I just focused on bringing out passages from the Muslim sources on, chapters coming up missing and verses eaten by a sheep and things like that. So I focused on that route. Whereas now that it's becoming such a huge issue, I want to say, guys, you have to do all of 10 minutes of research to find the holes in the narrative, right? You could, because I'm saying I'm pretty new to this, and I look at this and I'm like, well, this does not fit. This does not fit what you guys are saying. So the most common explanation we're giving is that the 7 ahruf are the 7 different Arabic dialects, and that's what they're given, and that Muhammad was revealing the Quran in these 7 different dialects in 7 different ways in order to make it easier for the different Arabs in in Arabia to memorize the Quran. And so that's the explanation. And that's the explanation we get from Muslims. You see, this solves the problem. Well, as soon as you start investigating this, again, 10 minutes of research. If you do 10 minutes of research, you'll find a couple of really important things. One, the reason you have the main story that's told is the one of Umar. When Umar hears another Muslim, Hisham, he hears Hisham reciting Surah 25 in a different way. a different way than he recites it. So he's ready to choke the life out of this dude. He wraps a garment around the dude's neck, and like a dog on a leash, drags him to Muhammad. He says, Muhammad, I heard this man reciting the Quran differently than what you told me. And Muhammad says, right. Hisham, you go ahead and recite it. And Hisham recites it, and he says, it's revealed in that way. Umar, you recite it. Umar recites it, and he says, it was revealed in that way too. And even though it's different, guess what, guys? The Quran was revealed in 7 ahruf. And so that's the standard story. And so, okay, this must refer to different dialects. And that is so insanely bogus once you realize the basics of this story. One, Hisham converted around the time of the conquest of Mecca. So that's 630 AD. So problem one, hole in the narrative number one here. This is number one, hole in the narrative as soon as you start looking into this stuff. First hole in the narrative. Hisham converts around the time, so around 630. Hisham converts 630 AD. Muhammad dies in 632. So at what point is Hisham going to be reciting the Quran? Let's say 631. He converts in 630. It's possible that, he immediately started reciting the Quran, but it's also possible that it would have been in 632 right before Muhammad died. But let's say somewhere right in the middle. Let's say 631. So you Muslims want to tell us that Muhammad, in order to make it easier for the different parts of Arabia to learn the Quran, has been revealing verses of the Quran in 7 different dialects, all the way up to 631. And Umar is surprised to hear someone recite something in a different dialect. In other words, you mean to tell me that Muhammad is revealing the Quran in all these different ways, and his closest companions had no idea about this? They didn't hear about this? And notice, Muhammad doesn't say, hey, Umar, let me tell you something. Did you know that the Quran's been revealed in 7 different ways? Now go out and spread the news. It gets brought to Muhammad as a problem. Muhammad, did you know that people are reciting the Quran in different ways? And Muhammad says, oh, yeah, sure. I've been revealing it in all these different ways. So this is Muhammad's explanation for the ahruf, is Muhammad's different explanation for why people are reciting the Quran differently. So he tells people after they start noticing differences, not before. He doesn't say, oh, by the way, guys, we're going to start revealing this in 7 different ways to make it easier on people. Instead, people come to Muhammad saying, we're reciting the Quran in different ways, and he has to come up with an explanation. He says, yeah, it's revealed in 7 different ways. So this is problem number one. You mean to tell me Muhammad is delivering his revelations in 7 different ways, and right up until 631 AD, a year before his death, no one knows it. His closest companions do not know about this. This is new information to them. He's been revealing it, and no one ever heard about this. Is that your story? So that's hole in the narrative number one. Hole in the narrative number two, Hisham was from the same tribe as the rest of these guys. He spoke the same dialect. Hisham is Khadijah's grandnephew. He's the grandson of Khadijah's brother. He speaks the exact same dialect as Umar and Muhammad and everyone else there. So he speaks that dialect. If the different ahruf are different dialects to make the Quran, learning the Quran easier for people who speak a different dialect, why is he teaching the different dialects? Why is he teaching a different dialect to a person who speaks the Quraysh dialect? Wouldn't that make it harder for him to understand it? Muslims say it's to make it easier. So he gives it in the dialect of the people that it's delivered to so that they can understand it. Well, why is he giving a different dialect to a person? That's going to make it harder. It's the exact opposite of what you Muslims are saying. You're saying in order to confuse Hisham, Muhammad made him memorize it in a different dialect. So notice this is what you would conclude if you spent 10 minutes investigating this. Again, I'm new to this. It doesn't make sense. Your dialect explanation makes 0 sense. It doesn't even crack the surface of being a good explanation. So those are 2 things. The third point I would want to point out here is this. Imagine that you don't already believe that Muhammad's a prophet and you're trying to assess the situation. Which one of these scenarios do you think is more likely? So scenario 1, which is what Muslims are telling us, is Muhammad is somehow delivering the Quran in 7 different ways and no one realizes it up until he's about to die. And then he suddenly announces that for all these years, he's been revealing the Quran in 7 different ways and no one ever heard a word about it. until they actually noticed people reciting the Quran in different ways. And then Muhammad was also, the people he's teaching these different dialects to, he's teaching people the wrong dialect. And that's what you're telling us, Muslims. You're telling us Muhammad's revealing the Quran in different dialects, and he's giving people the wrong dialect, the dialect that they don't speak. And no one ever knows about this, and it's all a secret. And then, 631 AD, shortly before his death, he goes and tells everyone, hey, yeah, there's 7 different dialects, and I've been teaching the wrong dialect to the wrong people. Yep, that's what I've been doing. And none of you have ever heard about it. No one knew what I was doing. Ha ha, got you. Right? So that's your story. What's more likely, if you don't already mindlessly believe what your leaders and scholars tell you, what's more likely, that or Muhammad's getting on in years, he himself did not memorize the Quran perfectly. And so when he would teach people the Quran, he would sometimes get things wrong. Even Muhammad himself did not memorize the Quran perfectly. And
That's
so
right.
when he was originally teaching it to his companions, when he was teaching Umar, then he taught it one way. And then years later, he's teaching a new Muslim and he messes up a little. He's getting old. He's getting on in years. We already know that he had all kinds of mental problems and so on, right? I mean, he walked around, he had to blame, walked around for between 6 months and 2 years having delusional thoughts and false beliefs. And he had to blame a magician for casting a spell on him because he was going nuts, right? So is it possible that this man's faculties are breaking down and that he was teaching the Quran in not exactly the right way years later? Surely. And imagine this situation where Muhammad had taught years earlier, he taught it in one way, and then he teaches it to a new Muslim and doesn't teach it in exactly the right way. But it's still, he got the gist right. But people notice. And then these people come to Muhammad. And at this point, Muhammad could say, I messed up. So Umar, please correct him on this. I messed up. I'm sorry. But Muhammad didn't want to say that because that would shake everyone's confidence in him. And therefore, he had to make something. Away, right? Yeah. Therefore, he had to make something up. Oh, yes. It's revealed in both of those ways. Yeah. The way I taught you, it was revealed in that way. And the way I taught you, it was revealed in that way. All right. What's more likely? Because that seems to fit a lot better than Muhammad's teaching different dialects to people who spoke the exact same dialect and doesn't mention this until after he's called out on it. So in other words, if you're just sitting back saying, what should I believe here? I think you'd have to say, gosh, Muhammad just messed up. He didn't memorize the Quran perfectly. That's why he messed up. And then in order to explain that, he comes up with this nonsense about the different ahruf, right? So, but notice that Muhammad is the pattern of conduct for Muslims. And notice they've been doing the same thing for 14 centuries now, trying to cover up the differences, making mistakes. Look at all these differences. Look at the differences. Oh, we have an explanation for all of that, just like their prophet did when he messed up. So now Muslims mess up in their different manuscripts and they forget things. And we've got an explanation for that. That's abrogation, my good man. Oh, that's different qirats, and that's different this, and they all act like they have a good response to these issues, and they just don't. Muhammad didn't, and Muslims today don't. Your average Muslim thinks they've got everything under control, and they just don't. And so it's our job to learn this stuff because, again, this is an awesome time to be an apologist. For 14 centuries, Christians were not in this position where we have the technology to reach Muslims around the world. We have all of that. We have their manuscripts. We have all their sources. We have never been in this situation. So these are awesome, awesome times.
Absolutely. And by the way, I think Jay Smith is following us right now. And if it is indeed Jay Smith, he mentioned that he did buy 7 different versions of the Quran online, and he just received them today. So knowing Jay, he will be extremely excited about this. Mm-hmm. With that in mind, folks, I'm looking to see if there is any questions. I see comments, dumb comments, if I may add also. By some of our friends, who are paying attention to other things that has nothing to do with any. Like, for instance, our friend Aqil, who says Allahu Akbar. I don't even know what that means, Aqil. Nobody even knows what that means. Akbar, he's bigger than who, basically.
No.
These are the classic reputation.
You're ignoring the Hebrew. Akbar means mouse, so it's saying Allah is a mouse.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. Well, I was going to say something, before we close. You mentioned memorization and the fact that, memory fades. And indeed, we have evidence. For instance, what Dr. Brubaker's been going through, by the way, these corrections, some of it bear the sign of someone, a reciter possibly, was writing from memory. And later on, it was discovered that there were words that were missing, for instance. We have evidence of basically people who are reciting something, couldn't remember the exact word. Possibly they use a synonym for it, So yes, indeed. I mean, even if it was memorized, but that doesn't mean it's perfectly preserved. I mean, there's one thing to say it's written from memory. Fine, I commend you for that. To say that it's perfectly preserved, no, it's not perfectly preserved. You cannot say something like that. Well, with that said, brother, any last words you want to share with us? What are you working on today? I mean, so people can go and watch your video.
Well, yeah, tonight we're having a discussion with a Muslim scholar from India who he asked if he could have 15 minutes of our live stream to present his case for Muhammad. And so we said, sure. And so he's going to present a 15-minute case for the prophethood of Muhammad. And then we're going to discuss his reasons for believing in the prophethood of Muhammad. As far as the videos I'll have coming out the next day or two, really want to drive home some of these points that Yasser Qadhi is bringing up, because on the one hand, what we can't emphasize enough how important what he said is with respect to, at first you say, what is this stuff? And you're confused. Then your Muslim scholars and apologists give you some answers. And then if you dig deeper, you find out their answers are wrong. And this is Yasser Qadhi pointing this out, but he pointed it out in the context of this discussion about the preservation of the Quran and the Qiraat and Ahruf and so on. But it's true everywhere. It's true everywhere you go, right? Muslims will hear that Muhammad is the greatest man who ever lived. So then they run into us and we talk about, Muhammad's relationship with Aisha and Muhammad taking Zainab and all these different things Muhammad did. And they go, oh no, what is this mess? And then they go to their scholars and their apologists, and their scholars and their apologists give them answers. Oh yes, Muhammad had to marry Aisha because he understood she would preserve lots of hadith faithfully. And so they'll say something like that. Then they'll run back with us without realizing that, hey, if you dig a little deeper, you find out the answers these guys are giving you are complete nonsense. So I'd like to make a response, just pointing that out to Muslims here in the next day or two. And also, I'd like to give some of these basic facts about the story of the Ahruf and why it doesn't stand up to even the most basic scrutiny, right? This isn't, hey, I've spent years studying the Ahruf and Qiraat, and I've come to realize that the standard narrative has holes in it. This is me spending 10 minutes and realizing, whoa, the standard narrative is completely bogus. And so the point to Muslims is, guys, when does the point come where you just say, I cannot trust these guys? They've been lying to me all my life. I cannot trust them. There should be a point. You should not, as human beings created in the image of God, sit there and clap as you're being lied to your entire life. When someone is lying to you about your own book and your own prophet, you should say, I don't believe you anymore. But you don't seem to care. And all I can say is, don't tell me about your religion if your religion causes you to absolutely love and adore liars.
Absolutely, brother. Well said. Thank you so much, of course, for your time. Thank you for your ministry. And I pray that we will have you back again soon here. And folks, just a reminder, I will have Sister Hatoun on Thursday, Jay Dyer on Friday, Matt Slick on Saturday, and a surprise guest to share her testimony, leaving Islam and becoming a follower of Jesus. That would be on Sunday, and we'll announce all of those for you. Thank you to the moderators for the great job you do. Thank you for everyone who joined us here for your questions and interactions. And brother, thank you so much for taking time to be with us. And we pray that things will go smoothly for the Muslim guy today. Between you and Sam, we'll be praying for the guy. Lord bless you all. Until we meet again, have a blessed day. This is Fadi, over and out.